Hello there. Good evening, everyone. This is Saeed on WorldStreams Radio. Thank you to our listeners from all over the world for joining us tonight. To learn more about WorldStreams Radio, please visit our website at worldstreams.org. Our guest tonight is Professor Houston Baker. Houston Baker is an American scholar specializing in African American literature and currently is serving as a distinguished university professor at Vanderbilt University in the English department. Professor Baker has served as president of the MLA, Modern Language Association, and editor of the journal American Literature. Professor Baker is the author of more than 80 articles, essays, and reviews, and also published or edited more than 50 books. His most recent books include Turning South Again, Rethinking Modernism, Rereading Baker T., and I Don't Hate the South, Reflections on Faulkner, Family, and the South, along with his critique of black public intellectuals titled Betrayal, How Black Intellectuals Have Abandoned the Ideals of the Civil Rights Era. Professor Baker is also a published poet whose most recent volume is titled Passing Over, and we will have the honor to hear one of his poems on the second half of our show. Professor Baker is rated as one of the top scholars in African American literature. Good evening to our listeners, and good evening to you, Professor Baker. It's
good evening,
a pleasure to have you with us tonight.
An honor to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Professor, I was thinking of how to introduce the show, and I thought, consider me a person who has just landed in America, and I met you, and I asked you this question. What is an African American? What is the state of affairs of an African American in the United States? How would you answer this question if I give you 2-3 minutes?
It's a great question. I find myself when I walk out my front door each day thinking about that. And I suppose I would say that I would begin with the name African American and flash back, a number of years. I don't want to give my true age, but a number of years. I mean, we're talking decades here, and think that I grew up as a colored person, and then became a Negro, and then became a black man, and then became an Afro-American man, and then became an African-American man. And so in my lifetime, I have moved to the state that you would find me in when you landed and said, what is an African-American? And in a very serious vein, I think that the movement through the years and the kinds of political, social, economic events that have marked my time are so critical to this. I would say to you that an African American is now a person who can look at, as one of my public intellectual colleagues put it, the most exalted person living in American public housing, Barack Obama,
right,
and say, I am of his family. I am a person who is characterized by all of the difficulty and complexity and beauty of the man who is the chief executive of the United States of America.
Right.
I think I would add that there was a time when the great and celebrated and no doubt brilliant novelist Ralph Ellison said in one of his incredible essays in the 1950s, the Negro in America has nothing to do with Africa. He was, as Ellison put it, mammy-made in the United States. How different to call oneself nowadays with pride an African American. I mean, we're talking about a reclamation, a rehabilitation, and a focus economically, politically, sociologically of people lineage that was once called colored people and once called slaves, of course, proudly proclaiming that they are African American. And after I told you that, I would invite you to have a drink with me. And then
Definitely, Professor. But before we have the drink, still, I have this question. Why is it that, and you went through the stages of, when you referred to the decades, of going through the transformation, yet still probably these transformations are merely probably just labels. Why is it that the words African American denotes struggle as opposed to words, say, Italian American, which denotes a certain pride? Is this a mere stereotype? What is missing in this picture?
Oh, so much history considered from the perspective of Mr. Zinn, Howard Zinn, as opposed to the history that, not at Vanderbilt, of course, but that usually gets taught in official history departments. That is to say, if we think about the making of whiteness in the United States of America, let me give just one quick moment, and that would be the draft, as in draft into the military, riots in New York in the 19th century, when a huge number of Irish men decided that they wanted to kill Negroes or blacks, or well, an N word that describes it too, and they went totally wild and began killing people who are of my lineage. And the reason they did it was because they said, we refuse to fight in a war, that would be the Civil War, where the chief issue is the abolition of slavery and the freedom of Africans in America, which is what people who are of my lineage thought of themselves as when they came here in 1622, and many of us still think of us that way. So that's kind of been eradicated from the history when, well, I don't want to go into too contemporary examples because I risk being controversial, but I mean, as we look at Italians and we look at Irish heritage and so forth, at this point in time, that history of those Irish wanting desperately, even to the murder of more than 300 Africans in America, wanting to be part of the mainstream. Well, we don't have that history as Africans.
And they happen to be, Professor Baker, they happen to be the same very people that were actually marginalized in the society, the Irish specifically. And Kennedy is very much a good example or a good model for what you're talking about. I don't want to let
name. You called that name. I did not call that name.
Okay, that's fine. But here's the thought here. You mentioned Howard Zinn. We want to make sure to know what he did. He was the first professor to teach at an all-black women university.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to make sure that we know.
That was great. Thank you for clarifying that. He was.
Absolutely. Therefore, the civil rights movement, and going back to your book, what ideals of the civil rights era have not been published by black intellectuals to impact the mainstream society?
I think that in one sense, and I don't want to derogate the in-depth scholarship of many black intellectuals, including some who I critique in my book, Betrayal. I think that at the best and in their best labors, they've really done a lot to add to the archive, and an accurate, just, and energetic archive on the civil rights era. I think that I would like to just focus for less than a minute on their actions. And those actions often include a very much aestheticized or beautified edition or rendition of African American history.